I want one of you to come up with a design for Gale that involves utilizing slimes against humanity. This, in a Gale deck, feels like a no-brainer. Huh. I need to stop giving myself ideas for my own decks. I am my own worst enemy. My wallet hurts. Before I start this video, I do want to go ahead and give a quick shout out to the Angry Green Jellybean, who not only worked out a lot of the math for how to make a Slimes Against Humanity deck better to begin with, but also was available to be on a Discord call with me when I was trying to get this deck built, because the ratios for this were a whole lot harder than I originally thought they would be. Please go check out their channel in the description below. They make a lot of wonderful content and are now the inspiration for a few videos of mine. This feels strange, but you know what? That's entirely fine. I'm sure I won't also be inspired by the videos that Salubrious Snail and Rebel made about land counts, and just we'll talk about those in a different episode. For now, we gotta talk about Gale and his slimy nonsense. Gale Waterdeep Prodigy is a 3-mana blue commander who has the ability that says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand, you can cast the other one from your graveyard. So if I cast an instant, I get a sorcery from my grave, and vice versa. You still have to cast these with their mana costs, and the card from the graveyard does get exiled afterwards, but we are looking to abuse the ability here a lot. And we're going to be using the same backup commander as last time, with Master Chef as our background, because at the end of the day, the card we are trying to focus on is Slimes Against Humanity. This is the bulk of our deck. This is a wonderful, wonderful piece of Magic design in recent years. One of the few good things to come out of Karlov Manor. So, how the slime works is this. You pay 3 mana and you make a 0/0 green ooze token with trample. Then, you put X/1/1 counters on it, where X is 2, plus the total number of cards you own in exile that are oozes or are named Slimes Against Humanity. And a deck can have any number of these that you want. So, the real linchpin here is that Slimes Against Humanity is a sorcery spell, meaning that while this makes up the bulk of our deck, the rest of our deck needs to be primarily made up of instant spells, so that every time we cast an instant, we will be able to let Gale cast another Slime Against Humanity out of the graveyard. And I know what you're saying. Suris, wouldn't it be better to just have Adrix and Nev twin casters be your commander then? If you're trying to copy the spell, shouldn't you just copy those slimes and not have to worry about spending extra mana or having really wonky deck building restrictions? And hell, if you're wanting to have that work for all of your instant and sorcery spells, why not just play Riku of Two Reflections, who can do this exact strategy for much cheaper while giving us access to great cloning cards like Double Vision? And to you I say, yeah, you're right, but I wanted to do it this way anyway, so here we are. Let's first get a couple things out of the way. This is not a budget deck, but there is going to be a consideration for budget here. So I am not running a perfectly sculpted land base, so we're not going to be running shocks, fetches, and all that fun stuff. As much as I would run those in a physical version of this deck, I feel like at $145, we are already so far out of my usual budget thesis that without being a strictly full power deck, this just needs to have the budget trimmed out somewhere. So let's go ahead and get into the main crux of this deck. Outside of the Slimes Against Humanity, we are going to be running a Thrumming Stone. This gives any spell in our deck Ripple 4. So whenever we cast a Slimes Against Humanity, we get to look at the top 4 cards of our deck and then cast a slime from among them, and then put the rest on the bottom of the library. There are situations where this Thrumming Stone strategy is going to allow us to cast all of our slimes all at once, and then of course they will be in our graveyard, where they can be recast by Gale. Also, when a spell is cast this way, it does say we are playing the card, which means that card is effectively being cast. So we will be able to use Gale's ability on every single instance of the Thrumming Stone trigger. And because the slimes have trample, they need to be able to break parity some way with our opponents. So one way is obviously trampling over their stuff, but avoiding their stuff altogether works as well with a Herald of the Secret Streams. This gives creatures with 1/1 counters the inability to be blocked by our opponents. And we can also break parity another way by running Candlekeep Inspiration, which will give all of our slimes that normally have a base power and toughness of 0, it'll give them XX, effectively doubling the power of all of our slimes immediately, including the smallest ones, like way more than just doubling, actually. So if you've got a slime that's lasted from the beginning of the game as a 2/2, and you've got 5 slimes in exile now, the Candlekeep Inspiration is going to see that and give all of your slimes +5/+5, on top of whatever stats they already had. And remember, this counts the cards in exile as well as the cards that are currently in your graveyard. So no matter what stage of the game you're at, this card will always be able to see a lot of cards. It is immune to things like Bajuka Bog hurting us. And also, because we are not running a fully budget-oriented Gale build, we do have the ability to run a lot of MDFCs, so we will be running a Bala Ged Recovery among other MDFCs in our deck to increase our land count, to guarantee that we have well-sculpted hands all game. There's really not much more to go into other than saying that we are relying heavily on the Slimes Against Humanity. Normally in the core section of this video, I would talk about all 23 other cards in our core strategy, but in this case, all 23 of those cards are just Slimes Against Humanity. So I guess now we just have to talk about our draw section so that we can get into what else the deck is doing. We're going to be running 13 cards that are dedicated to strictly drawing, and every single one of them is going to either be an instant cast card or some kind of enchantment that will stick around for a long time, or some other thing that can trigger multiple times throughout a game. The reason we are doing this is we want most of our draw spells to be able to trigger a slime from our graveyard, and likewise we want playing a slime from our hand to trigger one of these spells in our graveyard. As a result, we are running a Consider, a Brainstorm, an Opt, and a Thought Scour. Cards I normally would not actually consider to be draw spells because they are just cantrips. They only replace themselves. But since we get to double dip on these cards in this deck, and we get to have effectively the Sign in Blood cost of them, if I spend 2 blue mana on an Opt to draw 2 cards and scry 2, it's just a better Sign in Blood, then as far as I'm concerned, they are true blue draw spells in this particular deck. We're also going to be running some bigger draw spells like Factor Fiction because we don't care about discarding slimes to the graveyard, as we can both recast them with Gale, and they count towards our slime count no matter what we do. Frantic Search for the exact same reasons, and it lets us untap lands to have more access to Gale's shenanigans. And on top of that, we are going to be running a Thirst for Discovery because, again, drawing 3 and discarding multiple cards, even if we don't discard a basic land card, it doesn't really hurt us when we get to recast cards from the grave all the time. I actually had forgotten about that secondary utility for Thirst for Discovery, but thankfully Angry Green Jellybean did remind me about that during our call. So, on top of this, we are also going to be running the MDFC Selendi Vision, as it does allow us to grab slimes from the deck while being a land in most other scenarios. Secrets of the Dead, so that whenever we cast our spells from the graveyard, we get to draw. Kindred Discovery, as it will allow our slimes to draw us cards when they touch the battlefield and whenever they attack an opponent. We're going to be running an Archmage Emeritus to draw cards when we cast instants and sorceries, and an Archmage of Runes to do the same thing for us, while also discounting all of our instants and sorceries by 1. Finally, we're going to be running an Inspiring Call, since all of our creatures will come into the battlefield with a 1/1 counter, be them Slimes or Gale himself, thanks to Master Chef. So Inspiring Call can both protect all of our cards from an untimely board wipe. It'll also draw us tons of cards for casting it. And once again, remember, most of these are instant spells, so if we cast a Thought Scour, that means we get a slime from the grave, and if we cast a slime from our hand, that means we get a Thought Scour from the grave. This should mean we're able to dig into our deck very, very well, but it does mean we have to have a pretty high reliance on open mana or discounting our spells, like with the Archmage of Runes. So we'll get into the various ways we're going to do that in a later section, but for now, let's go ahead and talk about removing our opponent's important game pieces from the board. Hey, you know what's better than winning a game? Stopping your opponent from winning a game so that you can win the game after them. That's why we're running 12 different ways to stop our opponents from winning the game. Of course, because we are not running a fully budget build, we have access to some great MDFCs, Sink into Stupor. Why is this thing $10 as an uncommon? That is so confusing. But it is an MDFC that can get rid of a spell on the stack. Kalani Ambush can be used to make our slimes fight opponents and also win those fights. And Bridgeworks Battle is an MDFC MDFC that can be used to cause a pseudo fight to happen, because it also increases the power of our slime when we use it, so we will almost always win that fight. The last MDFC in this section is the Hydroelectric Specimen, which, while being a land on the backside, is great. Primarily, we're going to use this to redirect things like Lightning Bolt away from our Gale. I say Lightning Bolt, but realistically, we're trying to get rid of things like Path to Exile and maybe Path our own slime instead, so we can get a land ramp out of it or redirect it to anything. I say getting rid of our own slime, but we're really just getting rid of the Hydroelectric Specimen, but he looks enough like a slime to me. We're also going to be running some not very mana-intensive counterspells with Counterspell, Offer You Can't Refuse, and a Negate, and we're going to be running some low-mana removal with Collective Resistance, Resculpt, Rapid Hybridization, and Pongify. Now, Hybridization and Pongify only kill creatures, but they do only cost 1 mana, so they make up for not being able to hit lots of targets by simply being super mana efficient in a deck that really wants mana efficient spells. Resculpt and Collective Resistance can get rid of lots of problematic cards, and in the event of casting a Collective Resistance, we do also gain the benefit of being able to protect Gale as well. In our last dedicated targeted removal piece, we are running a Beast Within, because this is one of the best removal pieces in all of Commander. Being able to get rid of a land, being able to get rid of a Bolas's Citadel or an Omniscience, anything like that at instant speed is fantastic. Then we have a single board wipe. We are running a Wave Goodbye, because this can bounce everything that doesn't have a counter to its owner's hands. While our opponents will probably have 1/1 counters somewhere on their board, this card for 4 mana is an asymmetrical board wipe in about 80% of cases. So honestly, we can use this not only to stop our opponents from having problematic board states, we can also use this to get rid of their blockers and just remove them from the game entirely, because player removal is the best kind of removal. And that does it for all of our removal. And because we can double dip on so much of this removal, that should actually lend itself to even better gameplay when we are trying to deal with a dynamically changing state of game with our opponents. But that said, that's not all we got to talk about. I did mention that we need to talk about our ramp package, and this one was a little difficult to sculpt, and I'll show you why here in a sec. We are running 12 dedicated ramp spells, and these are split between cards that synergize with our deck, cards that discount our spells, and also instant cast ramp pieces on their own. Now, the reason this area was very hard to build up is there's really only a handful of instants in the entire game that ramp you, which sucks for our purposes, but probably makes sense for game balance purposes. Anyway, let's get into the biggest of our ramp pieces, a Kami of Whispered Hopes. If this comes onto the battlefield alongside Master Chef, this will allow us to ramp a lot throughout the game. Also, it just increases the 1/1 counters that our slimes get when they drop onto the battlefield, which is fantastic. For discounting our cards, we have Doc Arlock, who will drop the cost of our slimes in the grave by 2, Case of the Ransacked Lab, which will drop the cost of all of our spells by 1, and also, if we happen to solve it, which is easy to do, cast 2 spells from your hand and therefore 2 more from your grave, and this will be solved. This allows you to draw a card whenever you cast an instant or a sorcery spell. Thunderclap Drake is also dropping the cost of all of our stuff with a sacrifice ability that will allow us to copy a spell for every time we have cast Gale from the command zone. Font of Magic also benefits from casting Gale multiple times from the command zone if it happens to be a game where we're losing him a lot, discounting the cost of all our spells by 1 for every single time he's been cast. And then Primal Amulet drops the cost of our instants and sorceries by 1 as well, but this has the added benefit of being able to flip into the Primal Wellspring later in the game, which will allow us to copy any of our instants and sorcery spells as long as we use the Primal Wellspring to pay for them. Then we have the instant spells that are going to be ramping us through the game. Entis Restoration sacks a land and gets us 2 basic lands from our deck onto the battlefield, but if we happen to have a creature with power 4 or greater, easy to do if we have a slime, then this is going to get 3 lands from our deck onto the battlefield. Joint Exploration lets us scry 2, draw a card, and then drop a land on the battlefield. Harrow allows us to sack a land to drop 2 lands onto the battlefield. Growth Spiral lets us draw, then drop a land on the battlefield. Planar Genesis lets us look at the top 4 cards of our deck, then drop a land on the battlefield from them, or just grab any other card from them and put it in our hand if we need like a counter spell or something. Roiling Regrowth also sacks a land to drop 2 lands onto our battlefield. So these are really most of the instants I could find that are able to actually do what we need them to do. Ideally, this should create a scenario where we're able to play a slime and then immediately ramp, or play a ramp spell and then immediately get a slime. Unfortunately, this does mean we need to play more expensive ramp spells than we normally would in a deck like this, but hopefully that will be mitigated by the fact that we get to double dip into all of that ramp. For lands, we are going to be running 8 forests and 6 islands, as our deck does lean pretty heavily into green. We are going to be running the dual lands Command Tower, Flooded Grove, Hinterland Harbor, Overflowing Basin, Waterlogged Grove, Yavimaya Coast, Simic Growth Chamber for bouncing utility lands, Vine Glimmer Snarl, and a Temple of Mystery. Again, we are running more of a budget land base because I wanted to make sure this deck was at least somewhat affordable for someone. And that leads us into our utility lands. We're running an Alchemist Refuge, which will allow us to cast slimes at instant speed on our opponent's turn. Arch of Orzaka, as well as Bonder's Enclave and War Room, give us access to draw power from our land zone. Ominous Cemetery gives us access to creature removal from our land zone. Dust Bowl and Ghost Quarter both let us get rid of problematic lands like Glacial Chasm from our land zone. Mosswort Bridge gives us a free cast of a spell from the top of our deck as long as we have lots of creatures on the board with lots of power, which is easy enough to do in a slime deck. Myriad Landscape gives us access to some draw from our land zone, and Riptide Laboratory can be used to protect our Gale at all costs, since we can just pay 2 mana into it and pop him back to our hand instead of paying an just exorbitantly higher commander tax later in the game. All in all, the deck should be very straightforward to play, as what we are trying to accomplish is mostly easy. We want to put slimes on the board and bonk our opponents for big damage. But in the event that you wanted to know how to play the deck, regardless of how simple it may seem, let's go ahead and get into a gameplay section to show you how we are going to cover the board in Gale's goo. Now, on second thought, I probably shouldn't have worded it that way. Some of you were... Let's talk capable hands. Ideally, we want to start out any game with a slime in hand, but if we have some draw power, we may not even need to do that. So with this hand, we do have a bunch of lands, and we have some pretty good draw power. I'm willing to stick around with this hand irrespective of not having what I would normally want. So we'll go ahead and draw our opening card for the turn. We're going to go ahead and play a Yavimaya Coast and pass to our opponent. We move into turn 2. There's an Archmage of Runes. We don't get to do much with that, so we're just going to play an island and pass to our opponents again. Next turn comes up, there's an Overflowing Basin. I would like to do more than this, but we're just going to go ahead and put a Master Chef down on the board and move into turn 4. There's our first slime against humanity. I'd like this slime to be a little bit bigger, but we do need a blocker available for us. So let's go ahead and begin by getting that first slime on board. No, we're just going to get Gale out. We can get Gale out, that's perfectly fine. It's not the worst thing in the world because we might draw into an instant that we want, and we just get another slime against humanity. That's okay. So we're going to play this Ominous Cemetery, and then let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's the Archmage of Runes. Now we've got these two as blockers, and they are 2/4 and 4/7 respectively, so they should be able to block most problematic things that aren't flyers, so we're not getting swept out. As long as nobody is threatening a giant board pipe, we should be flying pretty well under the radar. Now we move into turn 6. Here's our Resculpt. We can start doing what the deck wants to do. I would have liked some ramp before we got to this point, but it's okay. Let's go ahead and pay 1 mana to Resculpt one of our opponent's problematic cards. Boop. And then that will draw us a card thanks to our Archmage of Runes. Now we want to go ahead and pay 1, 2, and we will play Slimes Against Humanity. This will pop onto the battlefield, making us a 3/3 slime thanks to Master Chef. And that will draw us another card. We have the Herald of Secret Streams here, and we have 3 mana available. I think the next thing to do is get another sorcery in the grave and usable, and you know what? We're going to go ahead and say that we used one of those bits of mana to cast a Resculpt on another opponent's creature from the graveyard. That's what we did, and then that drew us yet another card, putting us this deep into our set. We have 2 mana that we don't get to use, but we are going to use that on our opponent's turn to disrupt a spell cast by sinking into Stupor their card, drawing us a card on our turn. We move into turn 7 after getting rid of a lot of things from our opponent's board states, and I think it's time to go ahead and dig super deep into our deck. We can reasonably pay 3 mana and do Factor Fiction to show our opponents this set of cards. And likely, they are going to want the slimes to either go into our hand or go into our graveyard. So our options are probably going to be something like this. It's hard to determine when it's a dual casting deck. We are just going to let these slimes all make their way into the graveyard and put Doc Arlick and this island into our hand. We're also going to pay 1, 2, and we're going to have a slime that gets cast from the graveyard, meaning we get, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because of Master Chef. We get to make another token, and that token has 3, 4, 5 power on the board, plus the 2 that it normally comes in with. So we have a 7/7 ooze coming out from that, and we get to draw an extra card thanks to the Slimes Against Humanity. Let's go ahead and play a land for the turn. We're going to play this island, and we're going to pay 1, 2, and get Doc Arlick out on the board. This will discount our spells by even more, but it will make our colorless mana here kind of pointless unless we have Doc Arlick get, killed by something, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. Now we need to go ahead and figure out what to discard from our hand, and I think this forest is free to go. We move into turn 8, and we have a command tower, and let's go ahead and math out how we're going to do this. Because, actually, no, we do the command tower because we're going to do Growth Spiral this turn. So we're going to go ahead and play 1, 2, this is why filter lands are good, everybody, and we are going to Growth Spiral in order to draw a card and drop a card down. We'll also pay 1 mana onto that Growth Spiral so that we can go into our graveyard and cast a Slime Against Humanity, giving us an 8/8 slime when we do so. So this goes away, this slime comes out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, boom. We have a Bigly slime right here, and Growth Spiral goes here, and we get to freely drop, we get to draw 2, 1 from the Archmage and 1 from the Growth Spiral, and we get to freely drop a land down. That's going to be this Mosswort Bridge. Let's go ahead and see what the bridge can grab us, and, well, it's just going to be another slime. So we're going to put that slime under the bridge and throw these cards to the bottom of the deck. Now, as we are sitting right now, we have access to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mana. And as of right now, our opponents have probably built up board states that are problematic. So, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have just enough mana to set our opponents back a little bit with a Wave Goodbye. So I think that's what we're going to do. We're going to pay 2 mana, and we're going to use Wave Goodbye, set our opponents back, and we are going to get a cast of an instant from our graveyard, which I guess could just be the Growth Spiral, but we don't have a land in our hand, so I think it's okay not to worry with that too much right now. So let's go ahead and let the Wave Goodbye just do its thing, get rid of all of our opponent's creatures, and then we're going to set up a little more for the next turn. We pay 1 mana to get Slime Against Humanity onto the battlefield. This will go ahead and throw a slime in here and generate a 9/9 slime. Now we are set up to just kill a player outright when our turn comes around. And actually, we didn't even need to do that. We didn't even need to do that. There was a much more efficient way we could have done that. Let me not be an idiot with the deck that I just built. We passed our opponents, and on our opponent's turn, we cast an Opt, and then we get the cast trigger from that for Archmage of Runes. Then we get the cast trigger from Gale to go into our graveyard and get a Slime Against Humanity, which will make an 8/8 slime. So boom, that gets cast. This goes away. We get another 8/8 slime out of here. Boom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That costed us 1 green mana, and that gives us 2 draws thanks to both Opt and our Archmage. There. That's an infinitely more smooth way of doing that. Now we move into our turn, and we have a Pongify in hand, a slime here. We can probably just delete a player, right? Like, at this stage, a player just dies? There's no reason not to just kill a player, so whoever happens to have blockers, I am sorry for what I'm going to have to do to you, but you don't, deserve life. So we're going to play a Herald of Secret Storms. That's going to get a 1/1 counter. These are now unblockable, and we are just going to go ahead and aim our entire board at 1 player to delete them. Now we look really, really, really threatening to our opponents. So we need to be kind of careful of what we do next. So, honestly, I would hold up the Pongify, Let's go ahead and drop the Myriad Landscape on the board. I would hold up the Pongify in case one of our opponents does something important. And then we get to get a free cast of a Slime after that. So we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We could actually get away with tapping the Yavimaya Coast for a Slime, generating a 9/9 Slime so that we have a stronger board state and have a blocker that we actually want to block with. And that Slime will cast an Op from the grave, which will draw us 1, 2, 3. I'm not even worrying about the Scry from this. It's just not on my list of things I'm too worried about. And that lets us hold on to a rapid hybridization as well. That's actually pretty good. So on our opponent's turn, if they set up anything good, let's go ahead and get rid of some cards out of our hand. We get rid of a Slime, we get rid of a Kalani Ambush. Our opponents cast anything that we are worried about, any problematic creature that could spell doom for us. We're going to go ahead and say that we've rapid hybridization one of them, and we've Pongified another, and that will freely cast a sorcery from our grave, and that sorcery is, of course, going to be... You know, if these were green, they could have just been a wave goodbye. But unfortunately, I don't have enough mana to make that particular ability work. So we're going to go ahead and let it just be another Slime Against Humanity that gets cast. That's going to create another 9/9 Slime. That's going to come out onto the board. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We've stopped 2 problematic creatures, and we get to go into our turn and just turn these sideways at somebody. That's 18 damage, 21 damage, 28 damage, 36 damage, 44 damage. Now, granted, that is turn 10, and there are ways we could have been disrupted, but we have removed, like, somewhere upwards of 12 or 13 potential creatures from the board, and we've also thrown a spell back into the hand, so we likely have the ability to press forward just fine with where we're at right here. But in the event that we didn't, we do have lots of draw power available right here in our hand to rebuild if our opponents were to have set us back. And honestly, this is where I would normally say, hey, what upgrades could we add to the deck? But we're not running a budget deck this time, so the only real upgrades you could do is maybe fleshing out the mana base a little bit, adding in a breeding pool, a couple of fetch lands, and just running from there so that you always have access to both of your colors. I did notice in this playtest that the deck did suffer a little bit when it got its discounters online. You may want some more ways to filter colorless mana into colored mana. Even playing a Simic Signet or something may not be the worst thing in the world just because of how much it helps those colorless lands do their job a little better. But that's a thing for you to figure out as you play the deck. I still want to see what y'all's opinions are, what your versions of this deck end up being, but I got myself too excited when I built this, so this is what I came up with help of a friend. So thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed. I will try to make sure there are more budget decks coming out that don't necessarily just end up tickling my own fancy. But thank you for sticking around for this one. I appreciate it. As always, everybody, thank you all for being here, and insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Agamotto, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fire Shard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.